Hey, mate, 40 here, and it looks like Tucker Carlson is going to team up with Elon Musk. So that announcement just dropped in the past hour. Let's hear from Tucker.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. You often hear people say the news is full of lies, but most of the time that's not exactly right. Much of what you see on television or read the New York Times is in fact true in the literal sense. It could pass one of the media's own fact checks. Lawyers would be willing to sign off on it. In fact, they may have. But that doesn't make it true. It's not true. At the most basic level, the news you consume is a lie of the stealthiest and most insidious kind. Facts have been withheld on purpose, along with proportion and perspective. You are being manipulated. How does that work? Let's see. If I tell you that a man has been unjustly arrested for armed robbery, that is not, strictly speaking, a lie. He may have been framed. At this point, there's been no trial, so no one can really say. But if I don't mention the fact that the same man has been arrested for the same crime 6 times before, am I really informing you? No, I'm not. I'm misleading you. And that's what the news media are doing in every story that matters, every day of the week, every week of the year. What's it like to work in a system like that? After more than 30 years in the middle of it, we could tell you stories. The best you can hope for in the news business at this point is the freedom to tell the fullest truth that you can. But there are always limits. And you know that if you bump up against those limits often enough, you will be fired for it. That's not a guess, it's guaranteed. Every person who works in English language media understands that. The rule of what you can't say defines everything. It's filthy, really, and it's utterly corrupting. You can't have a free society if people aren't allowed to say what they think is true. Speech is the fundamental prerequisite for democracy. That's why it's enshrined in the first of our constitutional amendments. Amazingly, as of tonight, there aren't many platforms left that allow free speech. The last big one remaining in the world, the only one, is Twitter, where we are now. Twitter has long served as the place where our national conversation incubates and develops. Twitter is not a partisan site. Everybody's allowed here, and we think that's a good thing. And yet, for the most part, the news that you see analyzed on Twitter comes from media organizations that are themselves thinly disguised propaganda outlets. You see it on cable news, you talk about it on Twitter. The result may feel like a debate, but actually the gatekeepers are still in charge. We think that's a bad system. We know exactly how it works, and we're sick of it. Starting soon, we'll be bringing a new version of the show we've been doing for the last 6.5 years to Twitter. We'll be bringing some other things too, which we'll tell you about. But for now, we're just grateful to be here. Free speech is the main right that you have. Without it, you have no others. See you soon.
Okay, this is exciting.
Buddy, some big breaking news. Tucker Carlson is returning to the airwaves, but he's returning on Twitter in an interesting turn of events that comes in some big legal drama. Before we play you the video, we got to explain the context. One of the reasons that he is relaunching his show on Twitter, the news that just broke, and let's go ahead and put it up there on the screen. Tucker Carlson is now accusing Fox News of fraud and a contract breach. So what does that mean? The new letter sent by Tucker Carlson and his team is demanding legal action, saying that Fox News violated the terms of Tucker Carlson's contract and arguing that the non-compete provision in his contract is no longer valid, freeing him to now launch his own competing show or media enterprise. He announced his show will be coming to Twitter and the Twitter platform exclusively, we believe. Currently, there is some speculation that the Twitter move would technically violate the Carlson contract, but the lawyers say that Fox actually is the one who breached the contract first. So, for example, the letter was sent by Brian Friedman to Fox's lawyer and to their PR people, and also Rupert Murdoch himself. They say that Fox executives specifically have, quote, made material representations or promises to Carlson that were intentionally broken, constituting fraud. Also, they allege that Fox actually broke their agreement with Carlson to not leak his private communications to the media and to not use his private messages, quote, to take any adverse employment action against him. Basically, they are pointing to the leaked text messages from the redacted ones that only Fox is in possession of to the mainstream media, as well as multiple behind-the-scenes videos that clearly were leaked by somebody with knowledge or, I guess, access to the Fox archives. I guess, wonder who that would be. So what they say is that they believe that the representations by the Fox executives amount to enough of a breach of contract, allowing him then to come in and to launch his show on Twitter. The launch is what happened just now, a couple of moments ago. We're going to go ahead and play the full video for you, which includes a denouncement of the mainstream media and an explanation of why Tucker is relaunching his show on Twitter specifically. Let's get to it.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. You often hear people say the news. We bring some other things too, which we'll tell you about. But for now, we're just grateful to be here. Free speech is the main right that you have. Without it, you have no others. See you soon.
Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Obviously, it's pretty crazy that this is all in the context of a major lawsuit. But second, let's just talk about this in the vacuum on Twitter itself. Fascinating move to launch just on Twitter for a number of reasons. I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but traditionally, if you're somebody like who wants a long-form podcast or YouTube show, specifically a visual medium, you almost certainly would go to some sort of streaming platform, which is built kind of with that infrastructure. Twitter video is not built really for this at all. So I'm very curious to see if this is rolled maybe into the Twitter Blue program, or if they include long-form content playback speed, all these other things that you would never think about for long-form media distribution and consumption. We should remember that the history of long-form video on Twitter is not good. Outside of Periscope and live streaming, AM to DM was a BuzzFeed News morning show concept, which horrifically failed on Twitter. This was almost several years ago whenever it shut down. It's a big gamble not to go in the traditional route of podcasting and of YouTube. Presumptively, though, it's possible that this was maybe the easiest way. They thought that they wouldn't violate as much of the terms of the contract rather than going fresh out the gate with YouTube and with podcast. It's also possible Elon cut him a fat check, basically becoming a publisher himself, being like, hey, I've got all the money in the world. I stand for free speech. Fox fired you for X, Y, and Z. I'll hire you, and you can report exclusively on my platform. That's pretty interesting. Now, in the context of what I think about all this, and again, I have not spoken to him about this literally at all, so I have no inside knowledge. What I am curious to see is the level of reach that this will maintain, because I think that this does accomplish something that I know was important to him, and I think important for kind of his role in the GOP and media landscape, is Twitter's where the elite conversation happens, right? So if he is exclusively on Twitter, then people who are reacting to his clips can do so on Twitter. Also, all the Republican lawmakers can react on Twitter, because that is so key to where all the elites hang out. And it's actually kind of the perfect place where if you're going to be having elites on Twitter, then it's also a great time to ridicule said elites on Twitter, as you will do very likely on his show. That then raises the question of his cultural relevance, where I think this does square the circle somewhat in that way, just because it will be on that central platform. And of course, the reach will be massive. I mean, already, I think within 10 minutes of him posting the video, I almost had over 1 million views that were included on the video. Now, of course, I am not comparing cable news viewers to Twitter viewers, which is very, very different. They only have to watch for 2 seconds. Even YouTube views are, frankly, in my opinion, more comparable. But even then, of course, they're slightly different. All of these things. That said, very clearly, this will be able to reach a younger demographic, and it's literally unlimited appeal. And also, you can watch, presumably, on demand on Twitter at any point that you would want to. This may also prelude some changes to the overall Twitter platform. So anyways, it's a crazy development. And honestly, it's a gamble. It's a gamble to go straight onto Twitter. I personally, I would have gone a much more traditional route, YouTube and podcasts. That's what we do. But anyways, lots to be said here.
Megyn Kelly here.
Is it Fox? Fox seems too smart to think this is bad for Tucker, but they seem too smart to fire their #1 star too, and they did that. So here's the latest post on Media Matters that I believe is meant to ruin Tucker, I guess. It's unclear what he's talking about, just so you know. I don't know it any better than you do. He's clearly lamenting some liberal at Fox News who may have pronouns in their bio. Watch.
I was like, she's got a lot of liberals working over there, and they see this as war, and we're the main force on the other side. And that's crazy. If you've got pronouns in your Twitter bio, you shouldn't work here, because we can't trust you because you're on the other side. And she goes, well, who? And I said, I'm not going to name names because I don't know who did it, and I'm definitely not going to cast aspersions on someone unfairly. Just because you're liberal doesn't mean you did this. It doesn't mean you shouldn't work here. And Roger would never put up with this shit. Why would you do that? Do you know what I mean? They see this as war. It's like, I'm an actual liberal. I'm totally fine being like, our makeup artist is like a screaming lefty. No, but I'm not that way, as you know, but they are that way. And I said, I'm not ashamed of anything I said.
You now look like you recently had COVID. You look fresh face and healthy.
But do you know what I mean, Justin? If you've got that horrible guy who was just horrible, who was Judge Janine's guy, that guy. He's like a screaming left-wing lunatic. Why does he work here? What? He totally dicked over his anchor, and then we expect he's not going to dick over the network? I don't have specific information on it, but I would. It's just, it's crazy.
You're feeling angry, aren't you? You're feeling pissed off at Tucker for saying somebody who's so left and woke. That's really what he's objecting to. Somebody who's woke shouldn't be working for a show like his, or the Fox News channel. I have no problem with that whatsoever. He's not saying you can't work at Fox. That would be illegal to make a firing or a hiring decision based on that, though he's not in that position to hire and fire. But he's basically saying, why would you work here? This is not the ideological place for you. You're going to be unhappy. My whole life is spent railing against the woke. By the way, same. It's not that you're unhirable. You could come work here if you're a trans person. However, you're going to have to be okay with where I stand on this issue. You're going to have to listen to it all day long. And then you better not get any ideas about taping me or running out and making a stand based on the thing you signed up to do. Stu, your thoughts?
Yeah, that seems like a basic function of a workplace, right? You don't want to necessarily be fighting for everything you oppose. I know it would be very difficult for me to go to, let's say, a trash heap like Media Matters and work there, mainly because I would question every day why I even existed. But I wouldn't want to be fighting to try to unfairly ruin people's livelihoods on the side of the argument that I like. What sense would that make? And of course, if you go to Media Matters, you're not going to find lots of people who are on the conservative side of that arrangement, despite the fact that they seem to be indicating they're opposed to that situation, right? The fact that someone who's mega woke is going to go to Fox is probably just not the place that they're going to enjoy their work, and also their employer is not going to enjoy it. And I'm with you on this, Megyn, in that it seems so completely inept. It's hard to believe that Fox is involved in these leaks. most of these leaks, I think, have come to the side of where you'd like Tucker Carlson more after listening to them, realizing that maybe he is the exact same person behind the scenes that he is in front of the camera, which is not always the case in the media, as we know. I think,
and yet, who else would be leaking this? It's very clearly off of the Fox RDOM system. I worked there for many, many years, 13 years. You have an internal system. This is how they caught, remember the woman, I interviewed her, who leaked the tape of Amy Robach? She cut the tape, she didn't leak the tape, of Amy Robach saying, I had the Epstein story years ago. They buried it. And you could look at the system and figure out who cut it. The system shows you everything. You have to log in with your ID number. So there's no question that this was a Fox person, and they must know who the person is. Now the real question is, who did that person do it for? And then who was in charge of the clips after they were cut? I've espoused my beliefs based on my own dealings with Fox. And the other thing is, not only do I believe it was obviously, Fox, and I have said publicly, I think it was Irina Briganti, who runs comms, who's got a long history of attacking talent. But let's look at, I'll put this one to you, Dave. Let's look at the first New York Times article that released the Dominion texts that Tucker had been involved in that had been redacted for the litigation. So only Fox and Dominion had access to those. So it was one of those parties. And it also included 2 tapes that would wind up on Media Matters of Tucker like this, on camera but off air, but being taped. Now there's only one party that I just mentioned that would have access to both of those things, and it's not Dominion.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it's a great point. And I feel like, at this point, we'll probably know the Supreme Court leaker before we know whoever's, doing this leaking.
Maybe they'll get the Supreme Court marshal on the investigation of who's doing the Tucker leaks.
Could be the same person. I mean, maybe it's all Sonia Sotomayor. Who knows? I should have said that. I think Stu makes a great point, though, about this leaking. And I think it's why we're all confused as to why anybody would think that this makes Tucker look bad, is that what Tucker has and what really made him special, and the reason that he and Fox were able to create this unbelievably impactful TV show together, is that he's authentic. I mean, anybody who's sort of spent time with him, I interviewed him for my book, and it's some of the most insightful stuff that's in my book. He is who he is, and that's kind of rare on TV. And Stu's right. I mean, this just shows it to you. It's absolutely baffling to me that anybody could think that this is damning at all. I mean, it's innocuous. It's very strange, and it's unfortunate because, like I said, what Fox and Tucker created together was something extremely special, and it really is a shame to see it end this way. I guess it's not unheard of, but it's sad.
Well, but I mean, it's more pernicious than that because it's clearly an active campaign to destroy. And word out of Carlson's camp to me today is they're extremely frustrated that Fox is clearly slow walking the negotiations to try to keep him under wraps as long as possible. They do not appear inclined to let him out of the non-compete at all. They're trying to shut everybody up with non-disparagement and non-competition requirements. So they want him to be quiet. They want him to be quiet about Fox. They want him to be quiet professionally. That includes Fox, his executive producer, who they also canned with no explanation, right? This is a guy who's got a family to support too, others to support. And so they're gone. And Fox is not negotiating in good faith now, as Tucker has been looking to his allies to step up the pressure on Fox. And I can tell you this, the pressure's working because we just got in Friday's numbers on the Fox News channel, and I've never seen anything so low. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. I've never seen numbers this low on Fox News, ever. And I joined Fox News in 2004 when they were being funded by the Christy Lane commercials, okay? There were some lean days. We were still #1 back then, but that didn't say much because we weren't getting a lot of eyeballs on the channel. I'll give you an example. Okay, Tucker's last week on the Fox News channel, his show averaged 3 million in the overall, and they averaged almost 400,000 in the demo, 25 to 54, 377,000 to be exact. On Friday, the 8 p.m. show got, once again, he was averaging 3 million. It got 1.284, so we'll call it 1.3 million. From 3 million down to 1.3 million. And in the demo, again, let's call it 3.8, it was 377,000. So let's call it 380,000. They got 90,000.
Oh.
90. I've never seen, you're getting to the point, if you go below 50, you get what we call slashies. Remember, Abby? We used to laugh at the Morning Joe crew because they get slashies every day. We're like, these people are so self-important, they have fucking slashies. Anyway, they're looking at slashies potentially on the Fox News channel prime time. I realize it's Friday. Fridays are never strong. I'll get you Tucker's ratings on his last Friday. They were, I think, triple this. But still, 90, no. And by the way, they lost. They lost on Friday in the 8 p.m. to both MSNBC and CNN. You have to try hard to lose to CNN. The 9 and the 10 p.m. also lost to MSNBC. The 9 p.m. only went up to 100,000 in the demo. The 10 p.m. was back down to 94,000 in the demo. So what happens is they lose 8, they hemorrhage at 8, and then they never recover. The whole prime time is blown out still.
That is a jaw-dropping number. It's hard to describe to people who aren't in this business what kind of number that is. I do a radio show every day with Glenn Beck, and people remember Glenn from his time at Fox News, and so much of this is so familiar. But people don't really remember that before he was on Fox News, he did a little show over at CNN Headline News at 7 o'clock for a few years. We were doubling those numbers in the demo at CNN Headline News, not even regular CNN. And 90,000 in the demo is catastrophic. If you look back, and it's funny looking at the Dominion text that came out, they were panicking over a few people leaving to Newsmax for a while during the post-election aftermath. I can't even imagine what is going on over there. They must be running around panicking. And maybe that explains the sloppiness of this campaign, or this alleged campaign from people like Irina Briganti. And I will say alleged because I don't want negative things leaked about my children to their school newspaper. But I will say this is the type of campaign that looks terrible because they seem incredibly desperate. This is not just the #1 cable news channel. This is the #1 or #2 overall cable channel. month after month after month for years and years and years and years, and they're turning out, audiences that are similar to fish tanks at pet stores right now. This is a real problem for them.
So I'm not a quick math person, as I assume you guys aren't either. Otherwise, you wouldn't be journalists like me. But a quick chicken scratch back of the envelope shows me Tucker's last Friday in the demo. Again, that's the most important number, 25 to 54-year-olds. He got 270,000. 270,000 Tucker's last Friday. Now they're at 90. Even I remember that 27 divided by 9 is 3. So what he was tripling. They've lost 2/3 of their audience. He was tripling the number that they're getting here. So now they're in an all-out panic, Stu. You say you wonder what's going on there. Yes, they're in a panic, and they're more than ever determined to keep Tucker silent. They're like, oh my God, we got to shut him up. He's going to bring all those viewers. They don't get it. Tucker's audience is mad. They're going to stay mad, and they're going to continue to punish Fox while it keeps him leashed. The only hope they have is to unleash the guy and let him just use his voice elsewhere and try to treat him somewhat fairly now. But here's the deal. I think this is extraordinary, Dave. They put out their executive vice president.
Hey, Dooovid. There you are. How's it going, man?
Hey, Brokersham. Happy Log Boomer.
Yeah, happy Lug Boomer to you. Any reflections on our discussion, wide-ranging, last night?
Yeah, I was thinking about, so to say, my love of Judaism versus my failure to fit in with the Jewish community, and somewhat as like a bearer of Judaism. I talk to Judaism constantly, really with everybody everywhere I go, and I feel pretty comfortable with that. Although generally I feel semi uncomfortable with the larger Jewish community. Like I could play like Jewish geography and like knowing these people, or like demographics. So there's difference. People are interested in Judaism, and people are interested in Jews, and in some sense they come hand in hand. They're one and the same, but in many aspects they're completely different. And a lot of people purely have an interest in Judaism, as where other people purely have an interest in Jews.
Okay, so say the essence of your point one more time. Let me think about it a little bit more. Say it in a couple of sentences for me again.
Well, as someone who loves Judaism,
Mm-hmm.
walks around largely, as a Hasidic Jew. I basically wear my tzitzis and yarmulke everywhere I go for my whole adult life, and have also largely had dealings with non-Jews most of my adult life, besides for a handful of years where I was, clustered within the Hasidic world, and even that, I had relatively more dealings with non-Jews than probably your average Hasid. I guess we'll maybe focus on today, where now after COVID-19, I'm not really doing anything within the Jewish community. Almost all my dealings are with non-Jews, secular Jews, and I love Judaism, and I like talking about it. People ask me about it constantly. I still dress yarmulke and tzitzis basically everywhere I go, and I feel extremely comfortable talking about Judaism, although I feel relatively comfortable talking about Jews. But I was thinking about the dichotomy of interactions with people who are curious about Judaism versus people who are curious about Jews.
Okay, so you feel much more at ease, much more comfortable, much more excited, and much more competent making your way through Judaism as opposed to concrete Jewish community.
Yeah, I feel sufficient, or relatively, I'm probably pretty adept at navigating the Jewish community and even talking about Jews, because I know most relatively I'm pretty connected in the Jewish community. I could play Jewish geography. I could do like demographics and sectarianism, and like 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And I'm not sure, like, God forbid, I'm not saying as bad as like Aaron Amihud, because I do think I love Jews. I don't really have anything bad to say about Jews. I just feel distant from the community. And when I was in Brooklyn, I would be like a tour guide to the community. As where, like here in Metro Detroit, I never play that role. I never bring anybody to the community. Even the downtown synagogue, which was like liberal, there were hardly any Jews there. I used to, you have non-Jews, and they asked me about Judaism. I take them to the downtown synagogue, and they weren't really appreciative of that. And so I haven't played like tour guide to the Jewish community for years. And then it's easier to talk about Jews and because I'm assuming that may be something that you're familiar with as being like tour guide to the Jewish community, and then if you can't really navigate that role as tour guide to the Jewish community, it makes a difficult situation. I don't. Do you feel that like you've at least periods in your life you were tour guide to the Jewish community to outsiders that you met?
Yeah, somewhat. So I invited, for example, Kevin McDonald to Shabbat dinner, Shabbat services. I've, often try to explain Judaism and Jews to non-Jews. I know a lot of people who haven't knowingly met a Jew in their life. So I'd say explainer of these different worlds. So I explain Christianity or Seventh-day Adventism to Jews who are curious about how Christians process things, and then I explain Jews and Judaism to Christians who don't really know many Jews. But here's my thesis, here's my hypothesis on what you just said, but I'll just frame it strictly in terms of myself. So I've had my share of discomfort with Jews, my share of challenges with Jews, my share of failures with Jews, in addition to successes and joy. And I would say that overwhelmingly, my discomfort with Jews is overwhelmingly just a reflection of my discomfort with myself. It really doesn't have anything to do with them. And picking up on your points from last night about how difficult it is to make your way through the Jewish community as either a half Jew or as a convert, I don't think I feel that. I think I feel that I've been pretty close to 100% treated on my own merits. So the problems that I've had in organized Jewish life, I've had those problems in other forms of organized community. The problems that I've had with Jews individually, I've had with non-Jews individually. So I would see myself and my journey in Jewish life and my successes and failures pretty much close to 100% simply reflecting who I am as a person and who I have been as a person, and more adaptive and less adaptive habits that I've picked up. So for example, when I was a kid, I was beaten a lot, and so as a result of that, I picked up the habit of lying when I was in trouble. Now, at times that habit got me out of further beatings, but then that habit took on a life of its own, and it hasn't served me well as I've moved through adulthood. So my thesis is my discomfort with Jews or Jewish community, to the extent it exists, is virtually 100% my own discomfort with myself, my own failures, my own frailties, my own vulnerabilities, my own inability to see and grapple and navigate reality, my struggles with doing what I say and saying what I do, leading a coherent and transparent and honest and upright life. So to what extent do you think your discomfort with Jews is a reflection of your discomfort with you?
Yeah, I would largely agree with that assessment, although I'm not sure I have such a discomfort with Jews. I just feel lack of my place within the Jewish community, or
Hey, can you hold the show down for a minute while I take a phone call?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Great. So just carry on.
Okay, yeah, God bless. So, I love the Jewish people. I love Judaism. Fitting in with the Orthodox community is extremely difficult. And, so I was making the point, no path to leadership. And I did a lot of things in the Jewish community. I was always, kind of like a second fiddle to rabbis or to kids of rabbis, people with business people, prominent positions. and my stake in the Jewish community was always in association with a prominent member of the Jewish community. And, so to say, like, as a Jew, I would always, things that was activity, it was always like, I'm working together with this person who everybody knows, as opposed to, like me as a half Jew who needed to demonstrate my connection to the Jewish community through working together with others. So I was differentiating the path to leadership. I mean, certainly the Jewish community always put me to work and relatively treated me reciprocally. I would say that I think I've found in other activities say that no, I actually have found more a path to leadership among non-Jews, and I think it's something unique about Judaism that I'm not necessarily fighting it, like accept it, like the Gemara of Hillel, the convert that wants to convert on condition of becoming Kohen Gadol, and actually rabbis or more Haredi societies almost made it explicit to me. It's like, God forbid, you're never going to advance in the Jewish community like that. That lineage was very important, like in the Jewish community. But I mean, we don't have to circle back around that. So I was thinking, the roles that I found myself playing in was a tour guide to the Jewish community. So as an outsider, perpetual outsider, who many times found myself interacting with Goyim on behalf of Hasidim, Haredim. May I spoke good English, or certain business things, driving, even like the Arab and semi-official roles of interacting, although it was always on behalf of like a rabbi or a communal leader, that I was just kind of like the half Jewish assistant. But to be a tour guide of the Jewish community, like a Jewish friendly, a friend of the community who met outsiders regularly and then brought them to the community. Some of them maybe the community liked or didn't, and then once they got within the community, they might be on their own, or they might continue their friendship with me, but it would be understood kind of like, okay, like Dooovid might be a nice guy, and he might have done his best to try to explain these things to you, but then it would just kind of like pass them off to the community, and if they were successful with the community, then it would almost be just a fact of history that I was the one who gave them their first tour.
And how would you compare the way that Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews relate to you?
I have a much easier time relating with Orthodox Jews because, I mean, the one hand, because I mean, there's a lot of skepticism in the non-Orthodox community about Orthodoxy, and then second upon that to say that, like, well, who is this, half Jewish Balchuva, poor representation of the Orthodox community? So, it also goes to like the path to leadership. If leadership's a poor word, to be representative of that, like I'm a bad representative of the Jewish people, although obviously I am a representative of the Jewish people, and because I'm out there and I deal with large amounts of people, or maybe have at least some level of your prominence, recognizability, that I'm an intermediary between the Jewish community and people with little access to the Jewish community, whether that's secular or Orthodox. But I think it'd be much easier for like Orthodox, because I would be able to like give a resume, or just kind of like hand people off to the rabbis, as opposed to like we were talking about the path to leadership, because the secular Jewish community also has a strong leadership and message that they're trying to convey. So I could work together with secular Jews. I have a lot of secular Jewish friends, usually based upon common interest. But so to say, I think most secular Jews, even more than Orthodox Jews, would be like, oh, this guy is not representative of Judaism. So I've kind of internalized that, like, well, I'm not really representative of Judaism. I'm kind of just like, like a half Jew, Balchuva, who loves Judaism, but not really representative of it.
Okay, and so where we are in life, we're both bachelors, and we're not, super prosperous, super successful people. We've had little successes. So I would say that for myself, it's overwhelmingly my own actions that have led me to the place that I'm in life, that I've been overwhelmingly responsible for my position in life or lack thereof, for my happiness or unhappiness in life. I think it's like overwhelmingly more than 95% a result of my choices, my words, my actions. Do you think that where you are in life is overwhelmingly the result of your choices, or do you think it's the result of bad luck, or how do you view it?
No, I'm with you that 100%. Like, like I fully believe in taking responsibility, and your life is what we make out of it. And I mean, we've discussed that from the beginning, and I'm 100% in agreement with that. I'm not blaming anybody else other than myself. I'm just trying to the best of my ability, describe social dynamics or failures. And I think some of what I'm describing might sound, that's why I'm bouncing it off of you. I'm not blaming the Jewish community, but I think that these are cultural, social dynamics that might sound similar to you, that you're just like, yeah, these are difficulties that maybe other people might face, but I'm not putting blame on the Jewish community or anybody other than myself.
Yeah. Okay, so I was kind of challenged to assemble my rules for life, so I want to bounce some of them off you, get your reactions. So first one is taking a sentiment that's attributed to Francis of Assisi, and he said, at all times, preach what you believe, occasionally use words. So in other words, we're always transmitting. Like whatever we stand for, whatever's going on with us is always going to affect other people. There's nothing that you can just do on your own that won't have any effect on other people. If people on their own are doing drugs or watching porn or playing video games or studying Torah or, engaging in prayer, meditation, that is then going to have effects on people around them. So what do you think about this idea that we are always transmitting what we are? Like if we're depressed, if we're stuck, if we're angry, if we're happy, if we're at ease, if we're at peace, if we're in a holy place, this is always going to transmit, to other people and to the wider community. Any thoughts on that?
Just first, are you reading in order from your webpage, or you're just going?
Yes, I just went to the personal section. So at all times, preach what you believe, occasionally use words, meaning we're always transmitting. So you don't have to actually say anything to be most powerfully transmitting. Like usually words are not the most important
I heard you.
part
I
of
just tried to follow
communication.
along on your page, and I saw you. Okay, so you skipped the political part, went to
The
personal.
yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. So when you were asking like rules for life, and I have a few like Doovidisms, things that I commonly say, but generally I've kind of resigned to the sages in the Torah. So like I have rules for life. Like you say that, I'll think of like Pirkei Avos or the sages, and like 100%. I think I take the Mishnah or Maimonides more like in a God center. That I think it says picture the world in an even 50-50 balance, and what you do could shift it one way or the other, and not just in your dealings with other people, but even in the privacy of your own actions. So like 100% agree with that. And although usually I'm more universal and God centered, so if I phrased it, I would universalize it as opposed to focus on the causing with other people. But 100%.
Okay. Second rule is that since you enter into any kind of a relationship, whether it's relationship with people that you're live streaming with, people that you're working with, people that you're praying with, you're inevitably starting a countdown on feeling betrayed. I mean, you can't start connecting with people without at some point being inevitably shocked and disappointed and feeling betrayed that the other party has different priorities from what you expect. So, what do you think about this idea that as soon as you enter into any kind of relationship, you are starting on a countdown to feeling betrayed?
Yeah, I don't think I would phrase it that way because, like, betraying in the meaning that a person has broken their word. So, like an expression, everyone's got their own shulchan aruch or their own, ways they like to do things. And, because I had a lot of roommates at various points living in Israel and in New York, and, you're working different businesses and for, probably a decade of my life. And yeah, like constantly people do things differently and get upset, or you want them to do things the same way. It's never going to happen. I would put betrayed more at a level where a person has made an agreement with you and broke that. So, generally, I think I've had a lot of relations where I was never betrayed, because the expectations weren't on, the level. All I expect you to do is keep your word. So, like, even streaming, say, well, has Luke Ford betrayed me? And like, well, I'm not sure. We might had some, struggles in our relationships or period where we enjoyed each other's company more or less. But was there ever a betrayment in the terms like where someone gave their word, made a promise, and then broke it? So I'm not sure if you're giving a lesser definition where of betrayment, where in that manner.
Well, just that the feeling of being betrayed. So, just that general feeling is pretty inevitable whenever you enter into a relationship. So, you're thinking about it in terms of like a specific, obligation. I'm talking about it
Breach of
more.
promise. I mean, if
Yeah,
you're putting betrayed I'm putting it straight. I consider like betrayal like breach of promise, and it sounds like you're giving a softer definition of betrayal, that, or you're expecting at some point that all relationships will breach their promises.
yeah, I'm expecting everyone's going to breach their promises.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I think most of my relationships, try to be upfront about expectations. And I mean, if you mean like your people like eventually like stole from me, or even like bad mouth. I mean, people definitely wronged me, caused me harm, but in terms like breach of promise, like, okay, like I thought you were my friend, you were bad mouthing me behind my back. And saying, well, you never took an oath or promised you were never going to badmouth me behind my back. And so just some sort of expectation out of the relationship, and being clear about boundaries, and then having minimal boundaries that to keep the relationship going that haven't been breached, as opposed to if you feel betrayed that the person so to say was like bad mouthing you behind your back, but you're saying, well, was that a breach of promise? I never stipulated that you can't bad mouth me behind my back. It doesn't make me feel good, but at the end of the day, I can't really expect you to not bad mouth me behind my back.
Well, what about the experience of, live streaming becoming an e-personality and then having some people, ridicule and mock you and tear you down and call you an anti-Semite? Did that feel like a massive betrayal, even if it came from, say, strangers?
Well, no, 'cause I'm defining betrayal specifically as like a breach of contract or something, a breach of a promise. So if the person never made some sort of promise to me, um, like if you have roommates or something, like you promised you were never gonna, like touch my Super Nintendo or something, or whatever the case is, like it was a clear breach of promise that was agreed upon. So in that case, like, yeah, I consider it mean, unfriendly, unpleasant, but I wouldn't classify it as a betrayal unless it was some stipulated promise that was breached.
Okay, third rule. Don't separate yourself from the community. When you do, you are less safe, right? And you're less likely to prosper and to thrive and to have, good things in your life. What do you think of this idea? Don't separate yourself from the community.
Yeah, I'm a straight perky I'll teach that, or like it's a straight perky Don't separate yourself from the community. It's important to be part of a community. Sometimes you have to go your own way, or have independence, um, or avoid toxic behavior, or people putting you down. But usually, that doesn't necessitate separation from the community. There could be like levels of involvement. But yeah, I'm 100%. I usually like a Doovidism. Self improvement works uh, better in teams. Like that. But yeah, I assume you would agree that there's levels of involvement, and sometimes it's better to you know distance yourself from the community, or be less involved, but without separating yourself from it.
Yeah, but generally speaking, you want to be, right there in the mix. You don't usually want to be separate from the community. And if you can't get along with the community, then in my way of thinking, you need to go find another community. Like, let's say that you're a traditional person and your community is filled with, trans individuals, and your community celebrates transitioning, and this is just repugnant to you. From my way of thinking, you need to go find a new community. Now, since COVID, you have practically largely separated yourself from the community. What's your way of thinking about reconciling these two things? On the one hand, you don't believe in separating yourself from the community. On the other hand, you practically have chosen to do so.
Yeah, I mean, so there's levels, like, okay, like going to shul, going to events, or what level? So just like showing up. So, like, like I went to shul, I would pray, speak to a handful of people, shake a few hands, and go home. I wasn't really that strong part of the community. I just showed up. And, in the sense, I didn't, betray the community. I didn't turn against the community. I, still showed up, like a few Zoom calls, or I'm still in the email list. It's still like a larger community events, through internet networks, larger business level. Uh, but yeah, to some extent, like I said, like, well, was I really part of the community? So, the Orthodox community, that's kind of when it's okay, like, I'm not really part of the Orthodox community. I'm just a person who tries to live according to Orthodoxy, but largely falls short, and a person who goes to Orthodox synagogues. Uh, and so I just stopped going to Orthodox synagogues. But beyond showing up, that was really the extent of my affiliation with the community, because I wasn't really like tight with the community besides showing up to shul. So I mean, maybe if you have a tighter connection to the synagogue, and they say, well, is that your community? Like, well, just okay, I show up to shul, that's my community. Maybe your connections tighter, and what would you say to a person who's like, look, I've been going to shul for like years, and I don't have any friends, and all I do is like show up and say some prayers and then go home. Saying, well, is that your community?
Yeah, it's not much of a community. I mean, it's certainly better than nothing, but some things would have to change. Uh, Usually, I think one would seek out a mentor or a friend in the community, or rabbinic guidance, because that doesn't sound like a lot of fun, what you're describing.
Well, I mean, so in New York, I was able to find a community. Like, I would still show up to synagogues, and maybe in Los Angeles, you found like a private minyan or a small group of people. But like, if you went to, like the Young Israel or certain synagogues, you might have a handful of friends or people to talk to, but it's not really your community. So you had to find a community. And maybe in my circumstances, the only thing really in walking distance to me is a Young Israel. And then if I'm going to go to like the Oak Park Orthodox community, like I largely got put together, like I was with the Russian Balchuvas. And so like I spent 2 years, praying every day with the Russian Balchuvas, and Sabbath going to the Young Israel. And like, to some extent, yeah, I was part of the community with the Young Israel. I was part of the community with the Russian Balchuvas, but it didn't really feel like my community, and say, well, maybe my community doesn't exist. So I have a handful of friends in the community that I maintain my friendships with. But I kind of like struck out onto my own, and be like, well, I'm not really getting anywhere with these communities. So, I struck out on my own in the downtown synagogue, and then, I was making community there, and then they took a hard turn to the left. And so I've struck out into other areas, and I tried my best to not separate or burn bridges with the Russian Balachuvas or the Young Israel or the downtown synagogue, just to try to find community. And it sounds like, I mean, just from what I know about your bio, you probably had similar where you were bouncing between, like would you say Asia Torah or Young Israel or these various places. It wasn't like you might have showed up or had a handful of friends, and then eventually you found kind of like a small group of writers or a private minion to be like your community. But what was Asia Torah, like Young Israel, was that really your community?
Well, it was for a while, but then I polluted it and I got moved on. But I mean, I can go back now. I step back, inside these institutions. So
I didn't go back. Like I'm saying that you, I mean, God forbid if you did something to burn your bridge there, but I was saying like but before you burnt your bridge, you say like, no, that was your community. You felt like you
yes,
weren't just like a guy who was showing up or
no,
maybe trying to pull your worth. You felt like that was your community.
yes, I felt very much that was my community, and I felt completely welcomed, completely a part of things, and it was good. I don't think people who haven't experienced Orthodox Judaism understand how tight, how intense, and how challenging Orthodox Jewish community is. It's so much tighter and more intense than even the very tight-knit and intense Seventh-day Adventist community that I come from. So
Well,
I think. Sorry.
So I would say like, okay, like I was a member of Kiddush Club, and I know basically, I haven't been there, but it's probably a handful, but I basically know everyone in the Young Israel, everyone at the Russian Balichuva Shul, and I was part of Kiddush Club, and I had a lot of people I spoke to, but there's cliques, and like I wasn't really part of any clique. Like I just showed up, I prayed, I talked to a few people, I went to Kiddush Club, and then I went home. And okay, I'm an old bachelor. I'm not saying like I'm not saying it's people like purposely excluded. I don't have any complaints on anybody. God forbid, I'm not saying anything. But I'm just saying I didn't really feel like I'm part of a community. Like I just it was a shul I went to pray, and then I went home, and I was friendly with people. I had people I spoke with, but I'm pretty sure that there are cliques of people that are pretty tight with each other, and I wasn't really tight with anybody. So you could work with it and say like, oh, I really got to get in with one of these cliques, or just say like, it's not really the community. It's not meant for me. It's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with them. They just have a different way, and I'm probably not going to fit in with any of these cliques. I don't know if you're saying it like that. If you agree with me, like I mean, you could go to shul and just pray and speak and be friendly with people, or you could be part of one of the cliques. And if you're not part of any of the cliques, you're kind of just a guy who shows up to pray.
Yeah, I'd agree with that analysis, except instead of saying cliques, I would say if you don't have friends, then you're, very much on the margins. So I always had friends at the major synagogues that I went to, like real friends. And so that just completely transforms the experience of anything. So for me, the difference between walking 5 miles on my own and walking 5 miles with a friend is just night and day. The difference between eating a meal on my own and eating a meal with a friend is night and day. The difference between, davening with friends and just davening where I don't have friends is night and day. Studying Torah when I'm with friends versus studying Torah when I don't have friends there. To me, the friendship makes all the difference in the world. And so if you don't have friends, then I know I feel disconnected. I would feel disconnected. I wouldn't be around very long if I didn't have friends at a shul.
Or just define friends, because it's okay. I'm friendly with people.
You spend time
like,
together.
Just spend time outside of shul. So to say like I'm friendly with people in shul, but I don't spend time with any of them outside of shul. And so that's if you would agree with that distinction. When you mean friends, you mean people that your friendship extends outside of the synagogue.
Yes. You meet up outside of synagogue. You socialize. You do things together outside of synagogue.
Yeah. So I mean, I use the word click like that in that's kind of what I meant by that. Like you like friends
Mhm.
click, the people that they don't just talk during synagogue or friendly with each other, but they you know, are friendly, spend a lot of time with each other outside of synagogue. So you either have to work your way into one of those cliques, or you're basically just a guy who shows up. I mean, there's a lot of
Yes.
people who say professionals like doctors. I mean, doctors or workaholics that aren't really that friendly people. That I mean, so I mean, I would say that a lot of people in the synagogue probably aren't part of any cliques. They because they're workaholics, and they just pray and work largely, or caught up with their own family. But then there are cliques and friendship circles, and
Yeah, let me just
so
jump in. So, for most Orthodox Jews, just providing for their family, like most Orthodox Jews have large families, and so Orthodox Jewish life tends to revolve around the family. Like the center of Orthodox Jewish life is not the synagogue, right? The center of Orthodox Jewish life is the home and the table. And so Orthodox Jews tend to have large families. They have to work very hard and frequently very long hours to provide for their families. And so after you meet those obligations, frequently there's not much, energy or room left in people's lives after they meet their obligations to their family for friends.
yeah, I mean, so most of the cliques are like younger, newly married couples, and their friendship cliques are kind of based on help on raising their kids as part of a group. Even during COVID-19, I think they started using the word like pod for your relation to like who you allow into your house or your kids to play with. But a lot of in fact, the very wealthy people or powerful people in the Jewish community, um, they're really not part of cliques. They're workaholics, and or if they're empty nesters, uh, they don't really hang out. They're workaholics, and their cliques is professional. So maybe like the Young Israel, there might be like a clique of college professors, a clique of dentists, a clique of lawyers, or whatever, and they probably don't really hang out with each other much outside of synagogue. It's more the younger, newly married people that are clicky like that. But there's internal cliques, and you're saying like, okay, like because they're mostly family people, and then you have the Simcha circuit. So in some level, the level of the friendship barrier is, do you get invited to the Simchas? And maybe the very wealthy people, or like the rabbi, everyone in the synagogue gets invited, but usually that's pretty expensive, and there'll be a clique of the Simcha circuit, and you have to work to be part of the clique, and get invited to the stuff, and then some level of like social climbing that has its own flavor in the Jewish community. It's probably generic to anything, but so that level, there's being part of the community. Being part of the community has layers and levels to it. So I don't think I separated myself from the community. I just like stopped showing up. But the level, I wasn't really much of an insider in the community. I was just a guy who showed up to Minion.
Yeah. Okay. My next rule for life is that one should act, generally speaking, as though everybody knows everything, meaning the opposite of what I've done much of my life, which was to try to get away with as much as possible. And so, kind of the opposite of this, trying to get away with as much as possible, is to conduct yourself as though everybody knows everything. You're not trying to get away with stuff and transmit completely different messages to different groups. Instead, you live life on the up and up. So what do you think about the idea of live as though everybody knows everything, and it's the very opposite of trying to get away with stuff that you hide?
Yeah, and I put it more theologically, like someone who fears God, and like, okay, like our Father in heaven knows everything that we do. We can't hide anything, and so like an open book like that. Uh, to other people, also just kind of assumption that everybody is familiar with my sins and shortcomings. Uh, but the reality is that's generally not the case. Even think like my parents are the people who know me best. you usually don't know large aspects of my life. So like, okay, I'm a vegetarian, I'm into Hinduism, or like all this, my streaming, my interest in like science or consciousness or chess or something like that. So it could be someone know me for years, like, oh, you play chess, I didn't even know that. But yeah, I generally try to live like the assumption that everybody at least could know everything, including my shortcomings. I'm not trying to pull anything off on anybody. But as said, I take the more theological view on that. Like of God, fear of God. That's God knows everything, including the deepest depravities of our heart.
And what do you think of the incel phenomenon, meaning men who are involuntarily celibate? Do you identify? Do you resonate? Is this a concerning group to you? What do you think of the incel phenomenon?
God forbid, because I'm more renunciate and in opposition, or at least personally, or theoretically, to extramarital relations. So I think the incel phenomenon is largely in relation to sinful sexual relations. And I think with all the promiscuity, the people missing out on the promiscuity, and we've talked about that. I mean, we didn't mention it the other day. I almost brought it up, but the level of a Baal Tshuva or convert in the Jewish community, uh, plays in Orthodox Jews leaving the fold, and like how many Hasidim that wanted me to introduce them to girls, and like, I don't, like, I don't know any girls, like, how am I gonna? But like, certainly I knew more girls than they did, and so if you're talking like Orthodox incels that even though they're Orthodox, still want to have forbidden sexual relations, versus in the Orthodox world, if you compare like the Shidduch crisis, or something like that we're old bachelors. So I differentiate those. The incels are usually people that want to have forbidden sexual relations, as opposed to like the Shidduch crisis of old bachelors that can't find spouses. But it is obviously, just looking us in the mirror, God forbid, it's obviously, so I don't consider myself an incel, but like I suffer being an old bachelor, and like the Shidduch crisis, or however you'd call that.
Yeah, when I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, I'd often, hook up with women I had no intention of pursuing any kind of relationship with. And once I got into my 40s and 50s, that life was just no longer interesting or tenable to me. I would only want to be intimate with someone, whom I was going to marry. So the hookup scene, starts to pall, particularly, given that many of the women who are most vulnerable to it tend to be deeply damaged, and therefore, psychotic and dangerous.
It's a recent thing. I know enough about your bio, and maybe even you were like a late bloomer at health issues. So if you're comparing like the younger people, when did you say you were in your mid-20s when you lost your virginity?
I was 22.
22, or but then it was slow progress, like before you reached like LA in your
Yeah,
promiscuous years. It was a
yeah.
slow process, and but you're talking decades ago, before the internet, before the mass spread of pornography, before even in the 80s, and mass promiscuity and decline of sexual norms, like after Clinton, and various things. So that in your age, like, it's probably normal that just like you're like, even though you weren't strongly Christian, you were just like a guy who couldn't get laid but wanted to get laid. But now that the incel culture is something a little bit different, and it's probably technologically based, and it's a little bit more based on the information and all the stuff being out there, and having access to knowing what's going on, and feeling left out. So like, maybe, God forbid, relatively, I don't know if being a virgin till you were 22, if you felt like you're like a loser, or like you were missed out, and you had friends that lost their virginity. And I mean, like, I think, God forbid, in public school, probably like half the people lost their virginity in high school. So like in the Orthodox world, like being an old virgin is, but so I don't know your background, if you felt like an incel as a youth, or just didn't exist like that.
Well, I started having girlfriends at age 16, but I was kind of afraid of girls and somewhat afraid of intimacy and kind of afraid of the effect that it would have on me. I was afraid that I would go crazy once I started having sex because, I wanted it so much that I was concerned that I wouldn't exercise, good judgment in that arena, and I had every reason to be concerned. So, I mean, I was kind of afraid of women, afraid of myself, probably up into my late 40s. So, women are such a mysterious foreign country, right? They're just so completely different from us. Do you? How would you describe your reaction to women? Would it be fear? Would it be intrigue? Would it be distaste? How would you describe it?
I'm not sure. Like, I was always conservative. I always had pro-life leanings. So, obviously I suffered from male sexual urges, but generally I was in favor of abstinence. But like as a youth, my parents didn't push it upon me, and I went to public school and secular school, so I was from the few conservatives, uh, and I mean, God forbid, women didn't necessarily take a big interest in me. In high school, I was a chess player. It was kind of like geeky and awkward, and then I went to become ultra orthodox at 18. So women were not a big part of my life, and I like women. Like I try to be egalitarian, especially since I've moved out of living within ultra orthodox circles. Yeah, I'd like to build up a family, but women have not been big part of my life in almost all my friend circles, and has been mostly male. In my I've always leaned right, even from high school.
Okay, so I think a lot about state. Like, I want to be in a good state. I want to be in reality. I want to be appropriately humble, appropriately confident. I don't want to be manic. I don't want to have an exaggerated sense of my own importance. I want to be appropriately grateful. Like, it's really important to me to be in the right state. And so there are certain techniques that I've learned about that are really helpful for me to stay in the right state, so I don't become grandiose, unnecessarily obnoxious, have a vastly exaggerated sense of my own importance. So thinking about people that I'm grateful for, like people who've been kind to me, helps to put me in the right state. Thinking about times that I've just been absurdly selfish and cruel to other people, it kind of reminds me, oh yeah, I'm very easily capable of being a total jerk to people. Is emotional state and emotional sobriety, staying appropriately in reality, are these things that you think about? And if so, what do you do to try to keep yourself in a good emotional state?
Yeah, focus, meditation. I came onto these things young, because I went to Israel and started yeshiva and Hasidic meditation. Um, at 19 years old, 19 years old already. So I almost basically tried to never focus on negativity or even people who've wronged me or injustices. Try to stay positive and you know due largely to yeshiva training that would be academic, Torah. So, I could have an emotional state like I'm bothered by something, it's hard to concentrate, but I'll force myself to study anyways. And being part of like charity or the community, always be active in doing things and pull myself together to do it no matter what the case is. And I was always rather emotionless relatively from my youth. So, maybe slightly depressant, but typically I don't suffer much like anger or jealousy or strong emotions, and when I do, I'm able to you focus and usually I'll say like I'll just get back to studying, hit the book. So, if I have like a bad stream or a bad argument or something bad happens, um, I'll just go home and study. I don't usually call or complain or try to focus on the positive and long-term goals.
Okay, so if I was to look at my emotional palette, I would say probably about 1% of the time I feel humiliated. I would say probably 1 to 2, 3% of the time I feel angry about something. I would say I feel strong degree of joy, probably 10, 15, 20% of the time. And then I would say I feel content probably 40% of the time. I'd say I probably feel somewhat restless, anxious, the other 10% of the time. So how would you describe your emotional palette? How would you break it down?
As I'm pretty neutral on most cases. Like you were telling me, like I looked happy, like I didn't necessarily feel happy. Uh, so I think I'm relatively emotionless, and instead, like I came on to character refinement pretty young. My youth was relatively tame, um, and then I went to Israel yeshiva. Did you ever hear of a book called Cheshbon and Nefesh?
Yes, Reckoning of the Soul.
Yeah, it's a common expression, but there was a book. Some people claim it was actually copied from Benjamin Franklin in his method, but as like a Musser book where there's like charts and like you're supposed to like every time you had like anger or lust or greed that you would like make a note, and then you'd have your like nightly weekly reckoning with your bad character. It was an active role to character refinement, so I really liked Musser, and I came on to Musser um right away, after went to Israel 19 years old, and I was in Israel for 2 3 years, and I meditated on it. I actively tried to root out my bad character, angry, lust, envy, and thank God I did it in my youth. So I don't think really I've harbored on there's the statement in the the Tanya, the Chabad book Sefer Shalbani, of being the average person. Then it goes like to be righteous, just to be an average person is very difficult, and that means that you have to repent every night. And so years ago I used to say the Kriya Shema Shalmita prayer where I forgave everybody, but generally I took that to heart, and still till today I repent every night before I go to sleep and try to relieve myself of any anger or jealousy or hatred, including forgiving people who've wronged me. And so, thank God I came upon that in my 19 years old, and I've been doing it ever since. So I don't know if you ever came across that or did that type thing, but
Yes.
that you're just like, okay, tomorrow's a new day. I'm not taking it with me till tomorrow. If maybe I'm angry and it might bother me that I can't concentrate, later that night, or smoke some weed or something, and then maybe the next day I get up, I'm still a little bit angry, but generally I was able, through the practice of Orthodox Judaism, to successfully never carry something like that on, from one day to the next.
And are you still sober from the weed, or have you gone back to it?
No, thank God I have not, and yeah, I don't think I will, but I think it may take academically to get back into the study of science, because like just studying Torah or various things, but now that I've went back into like studying science and philosophy, like there's just so much to learn, and that the weed just slows me down. And I remember I was in university, like I didn't perform. I tried to study physics, and the weed just prevented me from academically accelerating and excelling, and I think to some extent I could excel in Judaism smoking weed, but like the more mathematical and scientific stuff. So I've rekindled my love of studying that, and that's largely replaced the need for weed. I mean, certain sometimes I probably could, just sit back and smoke some weed, and but I'm glad I don't, and I'll take my life seriously, and it's better. I was telling Michael, uh, we sat for 3 hours, and he was saying he's getting tired, he's losing his concentration, and so like I told him, I remember in yeshiva that like in Israel, the Carlin Stolen Rebbe said, a good student has 3 4 hour study sessions every day, and when I was in Israel as a I wasn't quite that good of a student, but I took my studies seriously, and I had chavrusa, and we studied hours, like 3 hours in the morning in a different chavrusa, night seder, and then on my own, I spent most of my time on my own, and so you smoke weed, time just goes by, and so thank God the love of learning and reading books, I think has permanently separated me from my need for drugs, even with my social failings. So maybe there was a period before COVID-19, my social failings necessitated me to my weakness to smoke weed. But with COVID-19, even with my social failings, my love of learning and reading has kept me off the weed. And maybe I don't know if you never had a dependency like that,
No, I've never tried
or
it.
maybe sexual addiction or something like that. But
Yeah.
if your love of reading and studying could help you give a replacement for that, like what are you going to do with all the time now? And saying, well, opposite, like God forbid I wasted so much of my life just smoking weed and spacing out.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on with the show for today. Any final words?
Yeah, good having conversation. Like I said, one of my Doovidism is self-improvement works better as a group. And it was even in the Musar, thinking back like to like Luke, my Chavrusa, like the old Musar days when I was in Israel and just saw these books for the first time. Just to, if you don't mind, just say at the end, I remember Chesbon and Nefesh, and I showed the book to my rabbi I was studying with, who was pretty extreme Hasidic, and he even was like recommended like sleeping on benches. But he was like, like he mentioned when he was young, he found the book Cheshbon and Nefesh on his father's shelf and read it. It's like, oh man, this is such a great thing. And his father told him, you could have the book. The guy who gave it to me committed suicide. But I remember when, like when I first started coming into like Musar Hasidus, I was just like, wow. And, like I would have friends and we'd talk about it. So, appreciate Luke and rekindling and, talking about these things. And, if you want to continue, reach out. God bless.
Okay,
Happy
God
lockdown
bless.
with
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dooovid. Great to talk to you. Let's get a burst here of some Richard Spencer commentary on the making of a murderer. Thoughts on the Hispanic Nazis?
It witnessed two rather shocking events. First, there was a mass shooting that left 9 dead. I think there are additional others who are in critical condition at a shopping mall in Allen, Texas, which is north of Dallas. This was followed swiftly the next morning by a car accident that might very well have been a car attack. The person who did this is named Jorge Alvarez. So there were 2 Hispanic males, both involved in things that are terrifying. School shootings and spree shootings are nothing new. And as depressing, I mean, that word again, as it might be, you could just chalk it all up to mental illness and social contagion and alienation and the availability of dangerous guns in the country, etc. But with both of these attacks, there seemed to be something more. So immediately after the attack occurred in Allen, Texas, I noticed on my Twitter feed that I shouldn't call it gloating exactly. Maybe schadenfreude is getting closer to what I mean. But there was a certain euphoria about the attack of, look at this, an illegal immigrant did it. So Mauricio Garcia was killed by the police, justifiably. And there was video being passed around of his corpse. And it was clear that he is Hispanic. He is a darker-skinned, mestizo type. You know what I mean. And so there was a certain euphoria or schadenfreude of among the right of, this is what happens when we allow these immigrants in. They're crazy. They hate America. They're criminals. They're gang members. And some of them, I assume, are good people. You know the routine. And similar emotions were expressed regarding the car incident. Then we started to learn more. At first, we learned about a strange tattoo that Garcia had on one of his hands, which strangely reminded me of of the logo for the Dallas Public School District. As you might know, I grew up in Dallas. I lived there ever since I was around 2 years old until I was 19. And I've been back many times, of course, so I know that city well. I'm not sure if I've ever been to Allen, but I've heard of it. Anyway, so there was a lot of criminology type analysis of the tattoo, what it means. Is it a car dealership? Is it a gang? Is it so on and so forth? There are many very well organized, violent drug gangs that are involved with the cartels that, of course, involve many young Hispanics. But then we learned something that was ostensibly, at least, extremely bizarre. Surprising, that Garcia had a patch on his vest that said basically right-wing death squads, RWDS. What does this mean? The first time I ever heard that phrase was not 2016 when that phrase was passed around Twitter on the alt-right. There, obviously it was an extremely outlandish and outrageous rhetoric that predominated, but I actually heard it out of the mouth of Ann Coulter. She was actually speaking at CPAC in 2014. CPAC's, of course, the conservative gathering held every year, held multiple times a year, I think. And she said conservatives should make it clear to Republicans that if they pass amnesty, they're going on to the death squad with the people who wrecked America. That, of course, got huge applause from the crowd. I can remember, I think I was actually in Washington at the time, and I was with a number of other right-wing types, and everyone was like, oh, based. That kind of thing. So what she was saying, effectively, and obviously she was using tough talk and outrageous language, but what she was basically saying is that the Republicans pass amnesty. We're going to put them in a death squad. I think she meant that we were going to put them to death. So again, that meme, I heard it first from Ann Coulter, but the meme was passed around quite a bit on Twitter after that and during the Trump presidency. I think in that sense, it was more of a death squad of a group of right-wingers who are going to go kill, who knows, the evil liberals who did this or illegal immigrants or whatever. And it is also kind of reference to Pinochet and his attacks on his leftist enemies. So what was that patch doing on the vest of Garcia? It's all rather curious. I think you could plausibly say that, it's just some coincidence. He found some patch and put it on there. Bikers will put on all sorts of crazy patches and so on. Doesn't mean anything, but I don't think that's the case. And the more we learn about Garcia, the more I think this was not just a kind of narcissistic mass shooting like we saw in Columbine being the paradigm of, we're alienated from this school and we're going to go out in a blaze of glory and get revenge against the jocks and the cheerleaders who oppressed us, something like that, where it was political in some way. It was kind of sub-political. There's a tinge of politics to it, but it was mostly theatrical and narcissistic. What seems to be suggested by what we learn about Mauricio Garcia is that he was engaged in a kind of terrorism. That is, he was engaged in a political act for a political end. Even if it were nihilistic and led to his own death, it was still trying to accomplish something, or at the very least send a message. So once more research was done, we learned that that does seem to be the case, that he seems to have been motivated by right-wing politics. And of course, on Sunday on Twitter, I mentioned that I saw that kind of schadenfreude, if that's the right term, regarding an immigrant killer. They then went to a different mode, which is, why is the mainstream media claiming that this guy's a white supremacist? Look at him. He's Hispanic. How could he possibly be a white supremacist? And, I think a lot of that the conservatives are kind of obsessed with the idea of a narrative that's being put forward by the liberals, and for good reason in many ways. I think, all media is kind of storytelling, narrative making. But they take it so far to the extent that it's almost like there's no reality here, that this was some gang shooting over drugs, but because those mean old liberals hate conservatives so much, they're going to turn Garcia into a conservative or something. Well, the more and more we learn about Garcia, the more clear it becomes that he actually was motivated by this kind of ideology. So I'm just going to read a little bit. This is from a report in the New York Times from today. After Texas mall shooting, searching for motive and grieving for children. Investigators trying to learn why a gunman fatally shot at least 8 people at a Texas mall are examining a social media profile rife with hate-filled rants against women and black people that they believe belonged to the gunman. The profile, found on the social media site OKRU, matches the gunman's birthday and refers to a motel where he was staying before the shooting. The profile also includes language praising Hitler with references to neo-Nazi websites like the Daily Stormer. On Sunday afternoon, officials identified the gunman, who was killed at the time, Marcio Garcia. The motive for the attack remains unclear. The police say he opened fire. Okay, that's enough. Once we dig even deeper, all of these hints and rumors seem to become corroborated. This is from a Twitter account run by Alexander Reed Ross.
So this is why I'm so careful to try to do a show that, to the extent it has an effect on people, it brings out something positive in them and not something awful. There are a lot of unstable, unhappy, reactive people who want to go out in a blaze of glory, who want, attention, who want to feel like they're at the very center of things. They want, the world, paying them heed. And so they go out and do a lot of horrible, horrible things. And these people disproportionately spend a lot of time online. So if you're going to do a show online, you got to take into consideration not just the accuracy of what you're saying, not just the truth of what you're saying, but what could the effect be on unstable people who might hear what you're saying.
He delved deep into the OKRU account. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about that site later, but he says he was, says this is according to the shooter himself, says he was radicalized through reading American Renaissance and Vidar, then meeting a white nationalist in the army. He was in the army and he was actually discharged at some point for mental illness. He laughs at the fact that non-whites can be racist too.
And yeah, Luke makes the point in the chat. Your show's probably the first show I found that didn't make me feel angry after watching. And Laponia said the same thing. It's the only show of its kind that he doesn't feel disgusted or hate himself after watching. So I have moved steadily in this direction, putting more and more thought, more and more effort, making more and more sacrifices to try to do a show that is not going to lead people, in a negative direction. And all this talk about, we're in a civil war, right? We got to go to battle against the left. We, got to take back our country. We got to, take over the government. We need to, save America for God and for traditional values and bring back the Constitution. And, we have to stand up against the satanic, evil pedophiles who have come to dominate the Democratic Party and all our elites, right? This just has a really bad effect on people. So I notice, almost every right-wing show that I've tuned into, I feel worse afterwards, right? I feel more anger, right? I feel, less effective. I feel, more fired up. I feel more disgusted. I feel more alienated from people who don't see the world I do. And that's dysfunctional. It's not adaptive. It doesn't serve you. And it is the host aggrandizing himself, making money, getting status, getting viewers by feeding the worst in people. Like even someone like Dennis Prager, who's Mr. Happiness, Mr. God-based morality, Mr. ethical monotheism, Mr. Judaism, Mr. Fighting for good values, yet the net effect of his show on viewers is to leave them less effective, less happy, more angry, more dysfunctional, more alienated from family and friends who happen to have, centrist or left-wing views on life. And it's just so easy to get engagement when you appeal primarily to anger and outrage. So, I could play you some video about, the horrible things that the left is doing, right? I enjoy hate porn as much as the next guy. Here's some hate porn.
My friends, yes, we love you, Queen.
We love you, Queen.
We're in your corner, and we've got you, and I will fuck anybody up who's trying to fuck with anything with you guys. It's really, in all seriousness, there's so many things that are hurting and really killing our kids, and we all know what I'm talking about right now. And it ain't no drag queen, because if you've ever seen a drag queen lip sync for her life,
yep,
it only makes you happier. It only makes you love more. It makes you a better person. Fuck, if I could do a death drop right now, I would, but I would probably break my hip. But,
do it.
And I, yeah! everybody out there, please support all the great organizations that are out there helping all of this nonsense going away like it should. All of these incredibly stupid policies. Bye.
Bye.
No more room for hate. Only love, and love equals drag queen.
So I'm not a huge fan of transitioning. I'm not a huge fan of drag queens. But if I was, in a community, a group, a 12-step program, filled with drag queens, I would do my best to get along with them to the greatest extent possible. Right? I would not be hostile. So I've been to many 12-step meetings where there's a trans person and other people would avoid that trans person. In particular, they did not want to have to hold hands with the trans person at the end of the meeting. So it's traditional in a 12-step meeting, we all hold hands and we say the Serenity Prayer or the third step prayer, something like that, and we say it together, and then we say, keep coming back, it works if you work it and you're worth it, all right? And I would often be the one holding hands with the trans person because no one else wants to hold hands with the trans person. So my philosophy is wherever you go, you're on the bus, you're on the subway, you're in a 12-step group, you're at work, you're at synagogue, you're at church, you're walking down the street, you want to have the best possible relations with everyone. The flaming queer, the trans queen, the Antifa dude, right? I just don't see the payoff in unnecessarily alienating people. I've been to many 12-step programs, not just for sex addiction. I've also gone for relationships, for financial matters, for debt, for under-earning, just the whole panoply, adult children of alcoholics, Al-Anon, all sorts of different programs. So I want to have the best possible relations with everyone, including, some male to female trans who's grossly overweight and has got a big beard, but is, completely sure that they're now a woman and they're getting in touch with their feminine side. And if we're, seated next to each other on the bus, or I'm walking in the park and he's right next to me, I would have the best possible relations with that person. It's not really my thing. It's something that is disturbing to me, but I still want to have the best possible relations with everyone in all my interactions. It doesn't mean that I'm trying to maximize the amount of time that I spend with people who are disturbing, but as long as I don't think the person poses, a physical risk to me, I want to try to get along with them. I don't want to just hate and be disgusted. There's got to be a better way of life, and that better way of life is trying to get along with everyone to the best extent possible.
Too, adding gotcha, says he walked around with an "It's okay to be white" t-shirt. And I could go on and on. It actually gets worse or more interesting depending on your perspective. He actually wrote a post claiming that he was inspired by Libs of TikTok. That's, of course, this extremely popular Twitter account that basically posts videos, as the name implies, from TikTok. They're crazy leftists talking about gender and all that kind of nonsense. They also found a picture of apparently the shooter.
So, yeah, if I can't be civil, right, if I can't interact with someone, and sometimes I can't, then I distance myself. But that's fairly rare that I just feel like I'm going to lose control and be rude.
Now, it's his head is out of the photo, so we can't be sure, but it is a man that seemingly looks like them. It's an Hispanic male, and he has a Texas tattoo on his shoulder. And then he also has kind of lightning bolt SS-like tattoo and a swastika on his left pectoral. It's actually quite reminiscent of a tattoo that is on the body of Weave, Andrew Augemeyer, who has the same tattoo. It's a tattoo that was made famous or infamous from the movie with Edward Norton, American History X, where he had that on his chest. Again, according to his OKRU account, he was reading the Daily Stormer, so who knows what we can make of this. Now, there's some interesting questions that we can go into.
So when will we know that Richard Spencer's genuinely turned the corner on being, antisocial and destructive force in people's lives? when he starts to try to make amends for the people he's hurt and the people he has misled. So he's got a lot of sharp commentary. Has he put much emphasis into making amends for the harm that he's done to people?
First off, one might be, what motivated him to do this, or what really motivated him to enter into right-wing, extreme right ideology? Now, I think a lot of leftists and liberals assume that it is the books and websites and Twitter accounts and just, easy answer giving, hate mongering ideology that creates these types of people. So if we could perhaps censor the web or curate content, or at least debunk content that's coming from Amran or VDare or the Daily Stormer, much worse, or crazy anonymous accounts, etc., Russian troll farms, we could just kind of censor this, or at very least debunk it. We could prevent people from falling prey to this. So it's a kind of prey and predator like dynamic in that mind. Now, you could flip that around and say that people who are already mentally ill are attracted to extreme right positions. Actually, in his book, which I worked on and published called Spiteful Mutants, Ed Dutton writes about this, and he actually does reach that second conclusion, that, in previous times when we lived in much more conservative, authoritarian, or even feudal societies, the way to upset the apple cart would be to be a radical egalitarian or social leveler, etc. And to a very large degree, that's still the case. You think of the stereotype of the alienated goth teenager who, becomes a communist or something like that. But we live in a liberal society now. We have a political theology of effectively liberationist democracy and personal autonomy and all the rest of it. All of the kind of dominant ideology that will ultimately give birth to things like transgenderism, etc. And in this type of environment, if you are a psychopath, then you are going to be more attracted to the far right. That if you really want to lash out at the world, then this is the way to do it. I mean,
So the community that you create has a big effect on how people express themselves, including, their darkness or their psychopathy. So, for example, in a traditional Orthodox Jewish community, someone who's nuts will, walk around mumbling Tehillim, or they'll, compose their own Talmud. All right. Other societies, they'll get violent and kill people. So it's the, other societies, they will, cut their hair in an eccentric fashion, or they will, get up in a park and, orate about scripture or politics. So people on their own, right, separate from the community, separate from the herd, right, wanting to feel important, wanting to feel something, right? There are various ways you can do that. Society will, create paths where people can act out. Now, you can act out in a pro-social or a neutral fashion, or you can act out in this, dramatically antisocial, vicious fashion. And our society has a great deal to do with, where these people choose to go.
Kids who went on Twitter and 4chan in 2016 and spread all these memes, I mean, what were they doing if not a kind of metaphorical school shooting? And that's not to say that all of them are dumb or crazy in a kind of obvious sense, but you're lashing out online. You are engaging in rhetoric that is so overheated. It's gas chamber memes and death squad calls and all that kind of stuff, that what you're doing is kind of consciously and actively attacking your neighbors and countrymen, or at the very least other people on these forums. And so someone who has psychopathic traits is going to be attracted to that. Now, there actually is a study that involves around 500 people. It was actually cited by Ed Dutton in the book. It's by Jordan Moss and Peter O'Connor. I don't think any study like this should be considered definitive. Most studies are wrong, as it turns out. And, this is one study, but it does suggest, this is the title of the study, the dark triad traits predict authoritarian political correctness in alt-right attitudes. So what he's saying is that people who are part of the dark triad traits, so that is psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. So people who are self-absorbed or feel extremely entitled or grandiose, or people who are truly psychopathic, have no sense of empathy or no conscience, or Machiavellian, people who are really willing to harm others in order to get their way. People who are like that are much more likely attracted to authoritarianism.
So the chat says trolling is legal. And I remember when I would interview, hundreds of porn stars and porn producers, one of the major points that they would always reiterate to me is that pornography is legal, therefore it is moral. But there is not such a connection automatic between what is legal and what is moral. There's all sorts of antisocial, destructive, personally destructive, harmful, and hurtful to others behavior that, perfectly legal, but also really bad for you and for people affected by you.
Mostly of the right, but also maybe of the left.
And trolling is such an extent. Like, a therapist made this clear to me. Look, when you offend people, you're hurting people. When you troll people so they get upset, you're hurting people. Right? So many people I know, one of their greatest pleasures is going online and trolling and triggering people, which is hurting people. So getting into the habit of triggering and trolling people and, getting great delight from causing emotional upset to people, that doesn't just stay online. You then are inevitably affected by what you're doing online. This is the dangerous perils of the e-personality, and you'll inevitably take that into your real life, make inappropriate jokes at work, get into trouble at work with your religious community, with your wife's friends. So whatever you do, it has a reflexive effect back on you. And the taking delight in trolling, and this is just my downtime, just blowing things off. All right, depending on how vicious you get, all right, it can have considerable negative effect on you. So I'm looking at a post here on Decoding the Gurus, the Reddit, and a good question here: what are the parameters of problematic podcast platforming? Who is the marginal problematic if platformed person? So one of the most common criticisms of live streaming and podcasting is the tendency for people like me to platform people with problematic views. So what are the salient factors that determine whether platforming of a person is problematic? So here are some possible factors. One, how evil are their views? So someone who says murder is great, right? That's more problematic than murder is not great. How potentially harmful are their views, such as don't get vaccinated is more harmful than the world is flat. How stupid are their views? The world is flat is stupider than Western civilization is under attack by the woke mob. How potentially harmful the platforming is. So being on Joe Rogan is potentially more harmful than being on my show. So what would you consider to be the marginal case? What are examples of prominent people or prominent views where their platform is right on the border of problematic versus acceptable? So if we all agree that platforming some active, unrepentant terrorist murder is a problem, and the platforming Stephen Curry from the Golden State Warriors is just fine, what are your edge cases? What makes them edge cases?
Left. So you could say this Garcia character, I mean, he's almost by definition mentally ill and dysfunctional. I mean, you don't engage in a crime like he engaged in, which of course led to his bloody demise, if you aren't.
Okay, so see this guy speaking on your screen right now, John Levine from the New York Post. He's the one who wrote the article about voter fraud through mail-in ballots, all right? He had this big expose for the New York Post about how there's just massive amounts of voter fraud going on with mail-in balloting, but he just did one article and dropped it. And so this was the article that my interlocutor, who's the guy who co-hosted a podcast with Paul Gottfried, that bloke and I, we were debating voter fraud, and his main argument for voter fraud was this New York Post article by John Levine, right? And I said, if there's anything to John Levine's article on voter fraud, right, that he would have done more than just, one article about it. So, come on, who's the guy in Florida? No, not Patrick. Joseph Cotto, right? So this was Joseph Cotto's, main argument on behalf of voter fraud. This article by that John Levine you just looked at. So John Levine here, Confessions of a Voter Fraud. I was a master at fixing mail-in ballots. So I made the point, if there's anything to this article, he would have done a follow-up, because you would become the hero of the republic. You would be financially set for life, right? You'd have access to beautiful women, to power, to fame, if you could just provide factual foundation for allegations that there was massive voter fraud in the 2020 election. So he instead, John Levine, guy you were just looking at, he just does this one-off article, and there's absolutely no evidence in this article except what someone told him. And I said, that's really bad epistemics, right? So a top Democratic operative says voter fraud, especially with mail-in ballots, is no myth. He knows this because he's been doing it on a grand scale for decades. But the political insider who spoke on condition of anonymity because he fears prosecution said fraud is more the rule than the exception. So that's the only evidence, all right, that the New York Post can come up with. We have no idea who this person is. The whistleblower, whose identity, rap sheet, and long history working as a consultant to various campaigns was confirmed by the Post. How much do you really trust the New York Post to do any work here? Like, if this is accurate, if what the New York Post and that John Levine bloke, published here, he would have the most amazing story in American political history ever, right? He would go down in history, right? He would be in textbooks. He'd be on the front page of newspapers and magazines. He would be all over TV news. He would be a hero of the Republic if all he could do is simply substantiate his article. But he never did any substantiation. He never did any follow-ups, right? He had a choice. He could be hero of the Republic, or he could keep cranking out, tabloid fodder. And so I don't believe that he decided, I don't want to be hero of the Republic. He ran into a brick wall. He just had absolutely no way to substantiate, these reckless charges. And yet, if you want to believe it, right? If your desire to believe this is strong enough, you will buy it. Oh my God, New York Post, they've vetted this. They've substantiated this. New York Post, very respectable publication. We can believe this. Here's the evidence of massive fraud with mail-in ballots. But there's no evidence behind it. This article came and it went, and everything this guy says in this article simply matches exactly with right-wing talking points. So if someone is just simply matching your partisan political talking points, right? If they're solely telling you what you want to hear and they're providing no evidence beyond that, then their accuracy is highly dubious, right? This is really poor epistemics, bro.
Truly mentally disturbed. He was kicked out of the army, apparently, for having some sort of mental illness. And thus, he is attracted to something that can allow him to lash out. There's a very interesting tidbit from...
Elliot Blatt says, well, what about Lizzo and her daughter taping pizza boxes over the windows of vote counting centers? Well, you can come up with 5,000 anecdotes. I don't know anything about this particular anecdote. But what I do know is that every red-blooded male would like access to having sex with beautiful young women, and you would get such access if you became a hero of the Republic and exposed massive amounts of voter fraud that changed the outcome of the 2020 election. So I don't know much, but I do know men like to have sex with beautiful women, and you would get to have sex with beautiful women if you could substantiate the case that the 2020 election was stolen. And given that no man has been able to do that, I am pretty confident that the voter fraud case remains completely unproven.
That was discovered by going through his OKRU account. And this is the one that was inspired by Libs of TikTok. He discusses talking with his teacher in chemistry. And he was shocked, you're a chemistry teacher. What are you doing talking about politics or whatever? And he actually said to her, when she said good morning to him one day, he said, final solution. And at one point he gave a Roman salute in front of her. And she was, of course, horrified by this. And so becoming a Nazi in 2023 is kind of the equivalent of listening to heavy metal when you're a teenager, or dressing like a goth, or dropping acid, or what have you.
So what will I do if California spends tens of billions of dollars paying reparations to its black citizens? I will try to make choices that are in my best interests. So I don't know how much that would affect the quality of my life, but just because the California government does things that I disagree with, that I think are wrong, that I think are misspending our resources, that is, sending out the wrong incentives to people, that doesn't mean I'm automatically going to leave any more than I'd, leave a friendship just because I think my friend is wrong about, voter fraud or vaccines for COVID, etc. Right? So I would hope that I would make a sane, calm, calculated decision about what's in my best interest. Right now, I love living in California, and I love going back to Australia on a regular basis. So what I have is love, love, love. Love is all I need.
It's a way of achieving rebellion. And people who are already psychopathic are going to be attracted to things like that. I think there might also be another element to this in terms of causation of a glacially slow but perceivable shift of Hispanics to the right.
And Elliot Blatt says, what about the large crowds coming out for Trump compared to the handful of slobbering I don't think I can say the slobbering, mentally disadvantaged people that would show up for Biden? Well, the number of crowds who would show up is a really poor predictor what happens at the ballot box, all right? And we know this from dozens of elections. I'm thinking about the 1975 Australian election where the large crowds would show up for the left-wing candidate, but the right-wing candidate won overwhelmingly. So crowd size for candidates just does not correlate with election returns. Is this the definition of mentally disturbed? Whether or not your views are acceptable to the public at large? So Antifa and communists not mentally disturbed? No. Here is the definition of mentally disturbed. Your mental faculties and psychological faculties don't enable you to effectively do what you want to do. So if my wrist works, my wrist is functional. If my emotions work, then I feel humiliated when I am humiliated. I feel joy when I have reason to feel joy. I feel content when I have reasons to feel content. I feel fired up when I accurately and properly have reasons to feel fired up. So that's mentally disturbed. If you're not aligned, your emotions and your psyche are not aligned with what's functional, with, what's adaptive. So if I was on here just, laughing maniacally, right, I don't think there'd be much downside to it unless people who are important to me were disturbed and then separated themselves from me. So what is disturbed? It's when your psyche, your emotions, your psychological reactions are not attuned to reality and are not adaptive to helping you navigate your way through the world. Now, it's the same thing. What does it mean to be physically disturbed? All right. If my wrist doesn't do what it's supposed to do, if my fingers don't wrap around this pen so that I can write, if my fingers don't enable me to type, if I can't, swing from a tree branch and do, a couple of pull-ups, then I'm not functioning as well as I was yesterday, and there's some disturbance in my functioning. So too, if I have an interaction with a friend on the street, and as a result of, perfectly pleasant interaction, I go into some, deep depression, and I just curl up in a ball and I sob for hours, there's something, disturbed about my emotional reaction. So mental health, physical health means, are you doing what you need to do? Are you able to do, what you were designed to do? Like your fingers or your wrists or your arms or your legs or your neck and your shoulders, you're able to tilt your head back and tilt your head forward. Now, is there freedom in your movement? Is there freedom in your psyche?
And a sense by Hispanics of being alienated and out of touch with culture. So Hispanics don't get the kind of special adoration, say, that African Americans get. They don't get affirmative action to the degree that African Americans do. You can see a little bit of this, but they don't get the kind of George Floyd treatment of some terrible event like the death of George Floyd being amplified to a point where this represents the sins of America, which we must purge through a BLM protest, etc. And there certainly is a lot of anti-Black racism among the Hispanic community. You can probably say that you can find anti-Black racism in every community. And there's almost a way of, this question of who am I? And you could see at Hispanic youth adopting a far-right posture in this rather extreme and outlandish way. And what better way to express that you are white, or at the very least you're anti-Black and anti-woman, than to just go full Nazi on their ass? I think that has something to do with it.
Well, disavow. Man, I had no idea how radical Hispanic youth have become. I mean, the pressure's everywhere. It's like going right through you. The fever's in the air. I mean, this is what Richard's talking about. Yeah, it's there. But don't underestimate the power of a lifetime ahead, right? Don't be Hispanic youth. Be electric youth, right? The power you see, the energy coming up, coming on strong. The future only belongs to the future itself. And the future is electric youth, not Hispanic youth. It's electric youth. It's true you can't fight it. Live by it. The next generation, it's electric. We've got the most time to make the world go round. Oh, can you spare a dime? So place your bet on our sound. Come back to town. Don't lose sight of potential mastermind. Remember when you were young. Electric youth. Feel the power. You see the energy coming up, coming on strong. The future only belongs in the hands of itself, and the future is electric youth. Bye-bye.